And I hope everyone is okay. Anyone that is sharing their screen is okay to be seen. If not, please let me know and we can. So welcome to today's webinar. We have Quincy Jordan. For some reason, when I was typing in his name, I went Jones, and now I remember where I got the Jones from. Because it was just convenient, wasn't it?
Yes, I was thinking let's leave it at Quincy Jones and see how many people show up.
So Quincy is going to be discussing cultural depth in an agile ecosystem. This is a fantastic topic, and when he suggested this topic, I was like, yes, this is so cool. I don't even know what it means, but I want to listen to it. And I hope we all get to learn from what Quincy's got to tell us today. So over to you, Quincy.
Thank you. Hey, well, first, I just want to say thank you, Kimmy, for having me, for asking. I'm glad, we met at, was it the Agile conference, Agile 2019, I think it was?
Yes.
And so Kimmy attended one of my talks, and I actually attended one of her talks as well. Also at Agile and Beyond, if I remember correctly.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So that's, kind of a testament to the benefit in attending some of those conferences and so forth. I mean, you get to network and, meet, really great people like Kimmy and so forth. So cultural debt. So we will go ahead and dive in. I was kind of delaying a little bit because I see people keep joining. So, all right. So just a little bit about the company that I work for. So I work for a company called Agile Thought. We are in 6 countries, founded in 2000. We have over 3,000 consultants. We primarily have 3 areas within the company: Transform, where I reside, which is strategic consulting, our build practice for digital delivery, and our run practice. And so I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge Agile Thought, because they're so kind to allow me to do talks like this during work hours, and I appreciate that very much. So I just want to make sure I acknowledge them and the great things there with the good culture and all that stuff to allow me to do these kinds of things. So it's really good. So who am I? So I am a principal transformation consultant, again with Agile Thought. By degree, electrical engineer, physics and math. I'm a problem solver kind of by nature. I like to dig into things and understand, like why things happen and get behind things. Host of certifications, and I'm not a big certification pusher, but I just acknowledge this to say that I like having lots of ways to get things done. And because I do consulting, I never know what I'm going to run into when I go to a client site. So I like to have a very deep toolbox because, you never know what you may need. And so my other interests are family, traveling, fishing, and kind of any water activity that you can think of. I really enjoy that. So what is cultural debt? Any ideas? I just want to see what you think. What do you think cultural debt is? And that is not a rhetorical question. Yeah, so I will ask questions as we go along.
Hi, I'm Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. So when I saw the words cultural debt, I was thinking about my last organization, and a core government organization in New Zealand, and very fixed in their ways. And for me, cultural debt from that perspective means lots of historical ways of doing things that we need to deal with. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So it's something that's from history that we have to work our way through. And it's, in my view, cultural debt is harder than technical debt because it involves people and changing people.
All right, yeah. So it's basically carrying old behaviors into new cultures.
Yeah.
And it is, in essence, it is similar to technical debt. But I agree, it is harder in many ways because we're dealing with people, right? And people are not always the easiest to understand. It's not always the easiest to get us to change. We resist a lot of things to some degree by nature, some more than others, some less than others. But yeah, it's when you carry over those old behaviors, those old ways of doing things that no longer fit for where the new culture needs to go. So it doesn't mean that everything that's been done in the past is bad and we don't need to continue that. It just means that, well, we don't need to continue with the things that no longer fit, and we need to encourage those things that now fit. So why do companies end up in cultural debt? So there are a few reasons that I have observed just kind of over the years. And the whole concept of cultural debt was something that I kind of coined several years back. And it really wasn't until maybe last year that I started saying kind of more about it and sharing more about it. And as things have progressed in the Agile space, it has opened the door more for people to really hear different thoughts and be more open to different ways of doing things. But lack of foresight, is one of the things. So I do transformation work with a lot of high-end companies, large enterprise transformations, and it's surprising to me at times where companies want to do this huge transformation, but they aren't really thinking about, well, how is this going to impact how people behave? How is this what's going to be different if we come in and we do this Agile transformation? It's not just, okay, well, we spin up some Scrum teams and everything's now Agile. Great, go do that Agile stuff and save us money and time. So there's a lot more to it than that. So you can't ignore the obvious. And some of those obvious things are, well, when you change things, people need to have not only a heads up about that change, but they kind of need to know what the change is. They need to know what's coming. They need to have some insight into how it's going to impact them individually, and then how it's going to impact the organization. And so inevitably, there'll be some resistance to change because there typically always is. I mean, you can take any number of people and you can take something as basic as, dare I say, wearing a mask, all right? And so, how hard is it to wear a mask? But it's change, right? So people don't tend to like change. They don't tend to like people telling them what to do. And so over time, if you don't have that foresight, if you ignore the obvious, if you don't pay attention to the resistance to change, if you have too much focus on the machine. So I had a client once before at the beginning of the transformation. I was speaking with pretty much like the top dog in the organization, and this was during the assessment. And he made a statement that stood out to me. And the statement was, I want to get the machine running. I can deal with the culture later. And I thought then we're going to have a mound of cultural debt in this situation in about 6 months. And sure enough, that's exactly what took place. Maybe a little less than 6 months, though, probably around 4 months. So it's not to say that the revenue machine isn't important. It is important. Obviously it is. I mean, none of us would be, at any of the companies that we're at if the companies are not able to produce value of some sort. But we can't allow that cultural debt to mound. And if we do allow it to mound, then we kind of need to treat it similar to technical debt. We need to at least be aware that this is happening and that payday is coming at some point. So Similar to technical debt, should you let it mound? Depends. I mean, there can be some strategic reasons to allow things to continue for a certain period of time, as long as you're aware of it and you know what you're going to have to do to rectify that. And then another reason that companies end up in cultural debt is past success. All right, so how many times have we heard, well, we've always done it this way and it's always worked for us? Great. Maybe it did and it served its time, and that's really good. But we're in a day and time now where things move at a rate that is so fast. It's just so much faster than it used to be. And we're so much more capable of adjusting than what we have previously thought. So if you think about the whole COVID-19 situation, how many companies were contemplating remote teams and work from home strategies and going through an agile transformation and so forth? And we have maybe 6 to 12 months that we'll roll that plan out. And then what happened? COVID-19 hit, and all of a sudden people did it in 1 to 3 weeks. Never thought that would have happened, right? But those are some of the things that took place. So these are some of the reasons that companies end up in cultural debt. So the struggle for cultural debt is real. It's a real struggle, right? So the old ways versus the new norm. So I think about, I don't know if you remember Blockbuster or not, but they were the precursor to Redbox, if you're familiar with Redbox, which is the precursor to Netflix in many ways. And so Blockbuster was wildly successful at renting movies. And they literally rented VHS tapes. It almost seems funny even saying it, but they rented VHS tapes and they rented DVDs. And eventually I think they got into music and games and so forth, but you physically had to go into the store. And they were very successful. And what they had accomplished was that they built a very well-oiled machine. Their machine worked extremely well. And Blockbuster actually had the opportunity to purchase Netflix, I believe, for around $150,000 or something like that, which, yes, seems crazy. And my understanding is the then CEO of Blockbuster literally laughed them out of the office. Laughed them out of the office, right? Because Blockbuster was so successful, right? They didn't need to change. They had a well-running machine. There was nothing they needed to do different. Was the culture of Blockbuster. They also acquired another part of their culture, which was late fees. And late fees became a critical part of their revenue stream. All of that became part of their culture. So the problem with that is when you run into that type of cultural debt, you are preventing the organization from continuous learning. You're preventing the organization from being innovative. You're preventing the organization from acquiring new ways to fit into new markets and to even acquire new markets. So that continuous learning aspect is critical to have to help prevent cultural debt from either taking root or from having significant impact within the company. Because unlearning is as important as learning. And it is not always the easiest thing to do. But, and I've heard it said before that unlearning is actually, I mean, how did they say it? The ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. The faster you can do that, the more that you're going to excel. In that it is going to be considered the new illiteracy. if you cannot unlearn information. That's a key part to the culture going forward for many companies, is the ability to unlearn and relearn. What do you think about that? I'm curious. Any thoughts on any of what I've shared so far?
That's so very true, Quincy. It's so hard to, like, even when I'm trying to learn something new, you always slip back, and it's like, oh, no, you gotta, smack yourself in the head or whatever it takes to try and unlearn. I find that very difficult at times, in terms of, like, sometimes I'd fall back into old, I still do a bit of testing. I fell back into old testing ways, and okay, what are the requirements and all this stuff, and it's like, no, you have this, you work with this for now, that's it, so I find the unlearning the hardest part.
Yeah. Anyone else?
And you're right. I think to unlearn things is very, very difficult. It's quite easy to say, oh, well, you just empty yourself and you're going in with the beginner's mind. What does that mean? Sometimes it's just so hard.
Yeah, all habits die hard, right? We have to be very intentional about unlearning. You can learn things with less intentionality, but to unlearn requires a lot of intention there. So as I was preparing for this, I came across quite a few quotes, and I'm not a big fan of putting a lot of words on a slide, but when I saw these quotes, I just said, man, I think I'm going to have to share these. And I just thought they were so interesting. So I'll start with the IBM quote. There will only ever be a need for 100 computers. So just imagine the culture, the thinking, and if IBM would have stayed in that space, if they would have allowed that culture of debt to just continue and stay there, ongoing. And they have their own, stories to tell. I don't know if you're familiar with OS2. Anyone familiar with OS2? Does anyone know what OS2 is? I can't see everyone, so if you know what it is, just jump in and tell me.
OS2 was an IBM operating system that
That's
they
right.
tried to come up with, and actually I think it was for PCs.
Correct. Yeah,
That's correct.
It actually predated Windows. It was more secure than Windows. It was really a better platform than Windows. The problem was IBM had a culture of, and I used to work for IBM, and this is one of the ways that I knew, because I actually worked on use the OS2. But they had a culture of, let's get everything perfect before we deploy it, right? And the problem with that is they had a rival coming up named Microsoft that said, you know what? We're not going to get everything perfect. Matter of fact, not only are we not going to try to get everything perfect, we're going to allow the public to help us to get it perfect. And if you really kind of think about it, was Microsoft that really changed the tech culture on the user side of getting feedback from users, really allowing users to use beta, level applications and software, and then getting that feedback, and then quickly incorporating that feedback into fixes. Like how many fixes did we get from Microsoft in those early days? But now deployments are happening daily and throughout the day. So looking at, let's see, bookstores. People want to pick up and handle the books, not read them from their computer. So what do you think about that? What has happened with some of the Borders and Barnes and Nobles and some of the other large bookstores out there and retailers? Many people are reading from the Kindles. Maybe many things are digital now. Think about, when I look at the bottom of the list, Kodak. You know,
There
I
used
don't.
to be a time where bookstores were places you would go, browse, buy,
Mhm.
and connect with people. Even Paul is a bookstore now.
Oh, thank you for sharing your antiques with us. Yeah, you know, and I was just thinking as I was saying that, and I was thinking there are so few physical pictures that our 14-year-old son has seen because almost all of our pictures are digital, you know. And I, you know, used to be an avid like amateur photographer, and you know, so I would get like so many pictures printed, you know, all the time. And now I have like 2 or 3 hard drives somewhere and with pictures on them. Uh, but yeah, I mean, so you know, the culture, you know, changes, and if you have that cultural debt, it really stifles how people think. It prevents that innovative thinking, you know, from being there. Power records. This one stands out to me, you know, quite a bit as well. People want to own their own music, not rent it online. Things change, right? And if you don't move those change, I have a friend slash associate of mine that she actually started a company where they allow artists to create their music, and it's legally protected in the process of creating it. And it's a company called The Labs, uh, and she was actually one of my prior students in a Scrum class, and she took, you know, doing things in an agile way, and she incorporated it into the company that she founded. But that culture of who owns the music, how the music is produced, like all of that is changing. And for the companies that are stuck in, well, this is how we've always done it, they're going to be left behind. That, or that cultural debt is just going to continue to mound and mound, and they're going to have a very difficult time eventually one day paying it, or they'll go the way of Blockbuster. What do you think about this list? What stands out to you?
I think for me, what stands out more is the Kodak and BlackBerry. You know, because just like you said, I actually earlier in the days I actually worked at Walgreen, and I worked in the photo department, and I could see during homecoming, graduations, you know, you see floods of people. But then, just like you said, they did not think about the future. They were just out there thinking just in that little box. Just like BlackBerry, when phones started coming out, everybody was a BlackBerry fan, you know, because they were sturdier, they were stronger. But then they did not shift that mindset of going beyond where that little window. And so I think you're right. Culture kind of helps a whole lot, but then if you don't, just like you're saying, the unlearning, it's not really easy to unlearn what you already know. It's difficult, even for us human beings. So I don't know. I don't know how to equate that.
No, and that's interesting, you know, because BlackBerry, they were really the smartphone. You know, like they really produced the first smartphone, and then they got left behind.
Yeah.
Interesting thing here is actually I used to work for Bell, and I used to talk to the BlackBerry people. They kind of, they are the people who push Nokia out of the business.
Yes.
And then they forgot what they did with Nokia, anyone else will do with them.
Yes.
Because they
That's
were
the
so
danger of that
focused,
past success. Yeah.
because they were so much focused on what just they did, and they thought it's end of the world. I mean, they are the people who innovated, not as you mentioned, uh, smartphone. They also innovated the server for best compression technology, push email, uh, anything you name. They are the people who did. Even the touch screen was first invented by Treo, Palm,
Right.
but they never improved on it. They just, and as you were saying Microsoft was taking feedback and working on it. These people never took the feedback to continuously improve and innovate. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, and Kimmy, I can't see when people are raising their hands, so if you could help me out with that, because I think I saw that someone had their hand raised.
Aaron.
Yes, ma'am. Uh, can I add something to this, or you have to go on?
Oh, sure,
slide?
sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, so I mean, I think one thing that's fundamental that I've seen the last 25 years is that the company's culture is really kind of inextricably linked with the investor, shareholder, stakeholder model they have. So if their objective is to have long tail kind of sunk cost invested markets, then they expose themselves to this risk. I mean, they just inherently do that because they're looking for these, these big, long, wide bursts of return, and and then they'll sink obviously more investment into to get that. And it's a feedback loop, and typically they won't be open to any disruptive or innovation within that cycle because they need the return on that long tail, that huge amount of capital and the cultural capital they're putting in. And what I found is that picking companies like that to go work in or to invest in or to partner with, you really are signing up for that vision, whether you like it or not, because they're going down that path. Versus companies that are not like that take maybe shorter spans or sell off products or exit products or joint venture products out. They tend to have a more dynamic culture and are less likely to get, they might get run over in the capital markets, or they might get run over, at a regulatory level, or someone screws up in their company, does something wrong. But in terms of their product and operating models, they tend not to have that, that big long bet that then they're stuck with. And I look at the auto industry as a kind of a great example of that. So I don't know. That's sort of a take I have around.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense or not. But
no, it does. It does. No, thank you, Aaron, for sharing that. Yeah. So we'll move on just a little bit. So common areas of cultural debt in Agile, specifically. So one of the things that has stood out to me before is traffic light reporting. All right. So what I mean by that, red is bad, yellow's kind of okay, green is great, right? And so part of the problem that I've seen with that before, so there was another client, and earlier in their transformation, they wanted to continue with what I kind of call traffic light reporting up to senior management. And this was another element of cultural debt because that was how they had done reporting in the past. And even though they were going through an agile transformation, they did not, when they initially decided before we came in to help with the transformation, they did not really think about, well, what's going to happen with reporting? What is that going to look like in this agile space? So they were still looking for the red, yellow, green. All right. Well, the problem that happened, there was specific projects that were red the entire time. Now, it did not reflect the progress that was being made, but based on their how they tracked teams and how they tracked projects, it forced it into a red slide. So it forced it to appear negative, although it was positive. And so one of the things that I see and point out is when we go into an organization for an agile transformation, or the like, and you say, well, we're not going to do Gantt charts. That's the old way. We're not doing that stuff anymore. All right, that's fine. But you better replace it with something. You better put something in there, because they need to know, senior management, they have to have a way of knowing what the progress is. That needs to reflect how you want the new culture to go. So if the new culture is an agile culture, then you need to implement some roadmaps. You need to use other things, other forms of communication, so that they can understand the status of things, how things are progressing, if there are any roadblocks in the way, where the needs are. They need to be able to understand that. So that traffic light reporting, it's not very beneficial in the agile space. But if you don't find something to replace it or help senior leaders in particular to think different and to look for something different, then what are they going to look for? They're going to do the same thing all of us do. They're going to look for what they're accustomed to seeing. And then they're going to say, well, that looks good. Is it red, yellow, or green? Oh, well, that's not what we're really doing. Okay, but is it red, yellow, or green? Okay, all right. It's red, but it doesn't reflect what's really happening. Have you experienced any of those types of things in your work?
Yes.
I think yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Who was that?
Oh, it was Lauren. You go ahead, Kim.
No, it's okay, Lauren.
I was just going to say, yes, I resonate with everything you were just saying. It's amazing how 3 little colors can impact culture in such a big way. And we tried at our last organization to get rid of red, amber, green reporting, and it was too impossible. Leadership just wouldn't budge on it, even though we offered up several other equally, if not better, ways of giving them updates. I'm still.
And so why do you think that would be? Why do you think it was so hard for them to let it go?
I don't know. It's interesting too, because we did have a lot of those what we called watermelon projects that were green on the outside, red on the inside, and they knew that was going on. So I don't know why they clung so hardly to the colors, because the colors actually didn't mean anything, because people were just lying out of fear for repercussion. But I think it's partly it gave them the control, and I think letting go of some control potentially. I don't really know.
Or
Sure.
the illusion of control.
Or illusion of control.
Well, so I have some theories on that myself. And I think one of the reasons is when we're, thinking about cultural debt and, how our cultures influence us. Well, one of the things that is very basic across many cultures in the world is what red, yellow, and green mean. And they keep us safe. That's the association in our minds oftentimes, is they keep us safe. They keep cars from crashing. They keep pedestrians from getting hit. So there's a certain safety associated with the traffic light reporting that, illusion or not, that we sometimes feel. And it's hard for people to let that go. But can you get them to let it go? You can, but I would advise when you do, you can't replace it with other colors, because it's just going to be so hard to get away from the whole color scheme thing. So you kind of have to come in with something just totally, like a totally different way of thinking, altogether. Were there hands raised? I couldn't tell. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of people like the 3 colors because these executives or whatever are really fast, so they probably just see it. They see green, gray. They don't even read the emails probably or the reports. They just want a really quick, bam, here's the color, great.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Actually, one time I did a test like that, Quincy, was I put a report, and in the bottom of the email I said, if you actually read this report, reply back and say, have a great day. Out of the 40 people, one person replied back.
Oh man, that is funny. Maybe you could have put the promise of currency at the bottom for the few and see what happens. So another area of cultural debt is a checklist-driven products. And it's not only checklist-driven products, and I'll talk about this a little bit too, but it's also checklist-driven performance, as well. But when you think of checklist-driven products, all right, so excuse me. So maybe a little contrary to some other Agilists, out there, I am not a naysayer of traditional project management. I think that there is a place for waterfall, in different ways. I think it's a tool, just like I think Agile is, another approach, another way to do things. However, the traditional project management mindset has meaning still in that checklist-driven type way of doing things. Has nothing to do with producing value whatsoever. Just, did you get the checklist done? And the assumption is that the checklist is associated with value. But that is not always the case. And so if you have that culture of a checklist-driven way of doing things, then we become accustomed, and especially some of our developers they get wrapped around the axle sometimes with this, kind of more than some others, is they'll get wrapped up into just going through the checklist of things and not really evaluating, okay, is this checklist of things actually producing value? And if it's not producing value, then why are we doing it? And so if you have that culture of just do what's on the checklist, then you're going to have that mounting debt, coming just over time. And next thing you know, you have something built that maybe actually works well, but doesn't produce any value because it was just a checklist and it wasn't value driven. It was just checklist driven. All right, so another area, meetings. So what about these meetings, all right? So meetings without focus, meetings where the culture says everyone's invited. Anyone who wants to come can come. But should that actually be? Now, one could say, well, it depends on the size of the organization. If it's a startup, maybe everyone should be there, if it's a startup. But if not, you really need to evaluate, is this something that needs to move forward in the culture of the company? So I've had plenty of clients where that has been the culture, and more often than not, they were companies that were going through a growth stage where they weren't startups anymore, but they had that recent kind of startup history, but they're now in a growth stage, and they were very accustomed to any and everyone being in a meeting if they want to be there. And, that's kind of like transparency gone awry. Like it's too much. It's too much collaboration. Like you can't get to a point of really making decisions because there are too many opinions in the room. And so that's, one of the areas where I think, an approach or, a framework like Scrum is very helpful, because, there are recommendations of who should be in those events. And it helps to keep it, a bit more focused. And, if the team is, in their daily stand-up, well, you don't need the stakeholders in there asking a bunch of questions that are maybe relevant, but not the right time and place, for those things to come in. But if you have that culture of, let's say, managers and stakeholders being involved in meetings that they really shouldn't, be part of. They need to let people figure out, how to figure out the how, while they maybe help with the what. That continues to cause problems. And not only does it mound the cultural debt, but it causes a lot of tension, within those teams. And over time, tension that's not resolved eventually explodes. So, there was another client that just came to mind, and there was essentially that same kind of cultural debt that was there but in this specific case, the culture was, and maybe you've never seen this before, but I'll just share it. The culture was, there was tend to be one individual on each team that was kind of allowed to do whatever it was that they wanted to do and cause all kinds of problems and disrupt everything. And they were never truly dealt with or encouraged or discouraged from those kind of behaviors. Their behaviors didn't change. And this particular client, for the first time in my career, witnessed a grown man have a complete meltdown and storm out like a toddler. I had never seen that before. But it wasn't surprising, because they would, the culture was to allow the person who made the most noise to continue doing that, and we just kind of try to ignore it and pretend it's not there. But eventually, that kind of thing explodes on people. So you can't allow that type of cultural debt to continue to mount. That's one of the worst kind, in my opinion, because what it does to the rest of the team is just so damaging, which in turn affects how much the team progresses. It affects how well the team works together. It affects what the team produces, which ultimately affects the business. And if the business is being affected, then, ultimately that's why much of it is being done. It's to produce value and provide a service for a user. Aaron, yes, you have your hand raised.
Yes, sir. So one thing I've implemented with varying degrees of success is a kind of a heuristic for meetings. So meeting has to fall into a group of, it's either for execution, it's for planning and decisions, it's for performance, it's for emergency. There's a set of about 10 of these. And when I've been able to have kind of enough people bought in, most people seem to opt in and out in a pretty regular fashion. And then we always sort of built a model that put a mom together, a meeting minutes, which people don't even know how to do or even know what it is anymore, but and which drives me nuts actually. But because then you just like, it's just a waste of time. And then those collate, and so people can choose to come to, let's say, the 3 meetings that fit whatever they actually can contribute to, and they can just read the moms of the rest and or contribute to the open. And the thing I've added to it in the last 4 years now, about 3 years, is we've put that on Slack now. So people can not go to the physical meeting, virtual, whatever, but then add value to the continuation of it. And then it shifts from more meeting mode to sort of channel of value. And the thing I'm working on now, we'll see if that works, is I'm trying to link this to our value streams, so that if I can do that, then the goal is to kind of kill meetings, right? Or kill the unnecessary communications unless it's directly connected to the value stream. That would be the ideal. So
I've definitely found collaboration tools like Slack and Teams and so forth to be immensely valuable. They definitely help reduce not only reduce unnecessary meetings, but more importantly, they provide very necessary communications to the entire team without truly disrupting the team. You know, I mean, you can, during what we're doing now, I have my notifications, I'm on Do Not Disturb so that, you know, I'm not getting pop-up notifications, you know, as I'm going through. But as soon as I get off, I'll get all those notifications. I can easily look, and it's not that I missed a meeting. I can still get that same information. So yeah, those are vitally important tools to bring into you know, the culture of how things are being done. And it's much easier now to do it because everyone's remote anyway. So there are some silver linings, you know, to this time that we're in, that we can actually capitalize on bringing new things into our culture, different cultures that are very beneficial in our work. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to comment on before we move forward?
I'm just curious how you help people to understand that they don't need to attend a particular meeting. Because a lot of times you just by the virtue of receiving the email meeting invite, they feel they need to attend.
So one thing is, don't invite them if they shouldn't be there. That's the first. Then you never know about it. You can give them the information about it. But you're right. If people receive the invite, then they may, because depending on the culture is in that organization, they may feel as though they are being rude or inconsiderate if they don't come to the meeting because they were invited to the meeting. So one of the things that I find to be successful, one, I'll educate, say if it's an entire program. So I'll educate everyone on the program of what the different meetings are, who should be in those meetings, who's required, then who's optional. So say if Scrum is what's being, the approach that's being used, then I'll go over those different events and make that very clear as to who should be, who shouldn't be, and why, and who could be optional. And for those who are optional, depending on that particular event, then I'll also spell out that if you're optional, then understand that you are optional to be there, but you're really kind of a fly on the wall. So you're there to get the information, not so much to participate in the meeting, you know, actively. Now, what happens when you have, you know, those few people that won't take no for an answer? So let's just say it that way. Then that requires a one-on-one conversation and really helping them to understand either why they shouldn't be in the meeting, why it's not valuable for the team for them to be in the meeting, or why it's valuable for them not to be there. Because at times, you know, teams can't, or the meeting may not progress well enough because, let's say, if a very senior person is in a meeting and it's a team level meeting, then it may be too distracting. Like they may not, you know, I'll go back to like a daily scrum, you know, well, you have a high level stakeholder in a daily scrum. People may not really be very forthcoming and transparent about, you know, what they've accomplished and what they have not accomplished in the past 24 hours and what they, you know, intend to accomplish in the next 24 hours. Because that meeting, that event isn't intended for those stakeholders. So I just find more often than not, if it's explained to the individual, the why behind them being there or not being there, that more often than not, they'll buy into that and they'll accept it and they'll respect it. And usually if they won't, I think there's probably a bigger problem to deal with than that.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So another common area of cultural debt in Agile is the proverbial wall of product development. Like we just, business is going to throw it over the wall, all right? And you all go off and develop the stuff and come back and let us know when it's done. I don't want to know the details. I don't want to know about what's happening. I don't want to know any of that stuff. I just want you to come back and have it done. All right, but that's a problem, right? So why is that a problem? Because we need to get feedback. We need to get feedback so that we can find out if we're on the right path as a development team, and that over the wall product development tends to not produce really good products unless, as many of us know, unless all of the requirements are completely static. If they are not going to change, and this is going to be the exact same thing from beginning to end, okay, then throwing it over the wall may be okay, because nothing's going to change. But I would argue that in many cases these days, that there are not going to be as many environments like that now. In the tech space, for sure. But in the IT space, it's just not going to happen. But there are other environments, as we know, Agile is proven to be, immensely valuable outside of IT. So there are other domains that benefit, from an Agile perspective. And even then, throwing things over the wall is not the best way, to do things, because you really want that feedback coming from the users or the beneficiaries of the product that's being built. Are any of you all still experiencing these days that over the wall product development? No one? Well, that's great. That is awesome.
We're still experiencing it, even in Agile.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it exists, like even not necessarily just product and development, but even within developments, like between development and then throw it over the wall for QA to figure out what the issues are.
Bring up an interesting point. That's right. So yes. So let's say you are within the team. Well, that culture oftentimes is still there to throw things over the wall to QA. And it is also that, I know it's not working. I know there are problems in my code. But so that I can say that we're done on the dev side, I'm going to throw it over the wall to QA and expect for QA to, just find it. And then we'll deal with it later. All right. So yes, so that is another area of cultural debt that oftentimes has to be dealt with. And one of the ways that I find to be pretty beneficial to deal with that is, so if you implement some aspects of DevOps and you kind of take the perspective of, well, you build it, you own it, then I find that people build in quality a bit better when they know that it's going to come back to them and they're still going to have to fix it eventually. And it's, you're not trying to embarrass anyone, but you do want to call out that, hey, look, how many bugs are constantly being found in this bit of work? So we're not naming names, but we're a small team here. So we kind of know who's doing it. So let's get it worked out and let's get it fixed. So yeah, thanks, Shakar. That's, I don't know if I said that right, but that's that is a good call out.
You did, yeah.
Thanks.
Quick question, Quincy.
Yes.
What's your experience? Because obviously almost every entity, government or private, contracts out so much, not just IT, but marketing, communications, logistics, facilities. I mean, it's everywhere. Of trying to manage your own cultural debt, and at the same time, this sort of almost attached cultural debt that you get as part of those relationships, because that sort of creates this other boundary or through sort of an interface. So I don't know if anyone else has that experience too, but.
Yeah, no, you bring up a really good point, Aaron. So what that brought to mind was there was a particular client where, so for starters, their Scrum team had, I believe it was like 26 people on their Scrum team. And so we can unpack that for a while just there, but I'll move on. So within that team, there were five to six different vendors on that team. And that was one of the things that they did not really think about. And I had to call out to them. Now, they accepted that as part of their cultural debt because they said, this is our model and we're not going to change it. So we have a model where we have a high ratio of contractors. And so this is how our teams are going to be made up. And so when that was established, I said, okay, well, if that's going to be the case, then we need to know that we're mixing the cultures of really almost 7 different organizations into one team. So when you have that, then one of the best ways I find to mitigate that is to take almost like an all-star team approach. So if you think about in sports, you have an all-star team, right? So that all-star team is made up of players from different teams. So the way you get around that is we are going to build a culture for this team. And this team culture is the culture that we're going to allow to supersede any other culture that any of us bring to the table. All right. So if it's something that benefits the team and it's within this culture, and we do this by outlining a very clear vision that we want for the team. We have our team working agreement. We put those things I'm really big on team working agreements because I find that they help bring it's a good true north. You know, it brings people back to, okay, this is what we agreed to. And I find that to be some of the things that are very helpful when you have that cross-cultural makeup, you know, within a team, because you're right, you know, it's a big mixture there. But at the same time, it's always a mixture like that, right? Mm-hmm. Because even if everyone works for the same organization, well, my household has its own culture, your household has its own culture, but we come together as a team and we formulate around a common goal. And as long as we have that common goal and we have a common agreement, then it makes it a lot easier for us to mitigate that type of cultural debt that would come into the picture there. All right. Okay, sure. Any other questions or comments? All right, so we will continue forward. All right, so another comment area, and this is, I would say this is something that I think has not been fixed yet across the industry, which is oftentimes performance reviews are not in line with Agile cultures. And so, you know, if you tell a team, let's say it's a Scrum team, you tell a team, well, you succeed as a team, you fail as a team, all right, then why do I get paid different than this person? Or why is my performance rating different than this person if we're succeeding as a team and failing as a team? So those are things that have to be addressed. Okay, so then how do you address them? There are different ways. You know, there is no, I don't know that I would say I think there's one way or a right way, other than to have a way that is fair to the team and fair to the individual, you know, as well. But this is definitely one of those areas that I think is oftentimes overlooked. So I think about another client that we went in for to do a transformation. Transformation started in, let's see, I did the assessment like November, December timeframe. I presented the recommendations and all that stuff. In January, they pulled the trigger in March to actually start the transformation. Transformation was going really smooth. Everything was going good. We had communities of practice. We were standing up, had all the teams going. We set up the teams. Everything was, in general, going relatively well. We hit November, and when I came on site, I could physically feel a difference in the room, like in the air, in the building. I could just feel it. There was a difference. And I couldn't figure out exactly what was happening that day. And it took me until the next day to figure out what was happening. And this is what was happening. Middle management and above, they were going through their checklists from back in December, January timeframe earlier for their performance reviews to get their bonuses. And all of that was not based on working in the new way in an agile ecosystem. So they were literally going back through a checklist, kind of creating stuff that really didn't have any value at all, but it was what they were being measured by. So if you measure people or you measure performance or you incentivize people one way and you ask them to work a different way, you're going to have significant cultural debt. And that's exactly what took place. They spent a good bit of that November, December, basically trying to pay down that cultural debt. Now, fortunately, in the next year, they were able to address that because they saw, well, actually, they didn't exactly see that was happening, but I pointed it out to them. And then, once pointed out, they were like, oh, okay, I get it. That makes a whole lot of sense. So going forward, they corrected it. But it took for them going through that cycle, for them to really see it. Have you seen anything similar to that specific, to performance reviews and agile teams?
Yeah. I had to run a project once to try and change the way performance was assessed, and I tried for a whole year and I was not successful. But it was interesting because they could see that the way our performance system was set up was a deterrent. It was not helpful to what we were trying to push forward, but they couldn't make the investment and put the effort into changing it. If you were to ask me why, I think there's a whole bunch of different reasons. Government agency, all other government agencies do it this way. We have to be seen to be doing it this way, et cetera, et cetera. No one wanted to have the difficult conversation to say, we want to do it a bit differently with our minister and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it is hard. It is probably, again, because of the people element to it, it is probably one of the things. And even sometimes people who are getting assessed on performance are used to it being a particular way. And even though they're really on board with agile and agile mindsets, they get used to getting scored and they like it. And it gives them certainty often of their performance pay, because pay and performance are linked. So yeah, it kind of goes both ways. It's a leadership thing and a people thing. Yeah, that's my personal experience. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's, this, so I am actually taking this whole COVID-19 situation and I am like riding this horse as long as possible to say, hey, look, we can just stop and do something different. And if we didn't think that we could before, we have proof that we absolutely can now. And so if we see something that's happening that we don't need to continue and we can't figure out how to gravitate towards something else, I'll tell you what, let's just stop doing it.
Godwin,
Just stop doing it, and then something will come up with something else that will actually be better.
I think Godwin has got his hands raised.
Yep.
Yeah, so Quincy, what happens in a situation where even though performance is also rated with the agile way of working, but then you're reporting to a manager or a senior manager who still have the old ways of doing things, who want to micromanage the team, and who wants to be invited to all these meetings, and you are pushing back. But then at the end of performance, it is still that same manager who rates you. What happens to that?
So one, that manager needs to be fully educated on not only what their role is in this new way of doing things, but how they can support an agile team, how they can empower an agile team, how they need to interact with an agile team. That is extremely important, because if they don't know that, to some degree, what choice do they have? You know, they're going to do what they know. We all kind of do the things that we know. You know, it's to quote Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get hit, right? So it's, you know, we fall back to our habits. So you have to really educate them on how to interact with an agile team, how to support an agile team, why it's beneficial for them to empower versus direct, because they're accustomed to directing, not necessarily accustomed to empowering. They really need to explore their ability to mentor their direct reports. That is vitally important. And they need to also measure themselves differently. So the way that they can measure themselves, so I'll take myself, for example, the way that I measure myself when it comes to transformation is not what is the client doing when I'm there. The way that I measure myself is when I am not there and they have to make decisions. Are they making decisions in line with the way that I have guided them, or are they falling back to their old habits? If they're falling back to their old habits, then I have not yet helped them to reach transformation. If they are making decisions on their own in line with how I've advised and given guidance and how I've gotten them to buy in, then they have actually begun to transform. And so for those managers, they can take a similar perspective. It's not what their direct reports do when they're there in the room, it's what they do when they're not in the room. And that comes through advisory and mentorship, you know, and so forth, which is part of what a good manager should do. Does that help, Robin?
Sure.
Okay, great. All right. Make sure I don't run out of time here. All right, so.
Quick one, Quincy.
Yes.
Quick one.
Yes.
In a transformation, I mean, you will often hear you don't tackle culture first. Obviously, when you have underlying structural issues, you want to tackle those first, and hopefully that can change culture. So what have you got to say to that statement?
One, I don't agree with it. I've heard it. I've heard those that say it, and I understand why they say it. But the culture is not going to stop because you're getting other infrastructure things in place. Now, does that mean that you should tackle the culture first? I don't necessarily think that. It just means that do not ignore the culture while tackling other structural or infrastructure type things first. I think it's a critical mistake to ignore the culture and say, well, we just want to make sure that we get things that, you know, the teams are producing. You can, and that's okay. But if you ignore the culture, if you have no plan for it, if it's not factored into your transformation, then that's going to come back to bite you. And then that's when you end up with teams that will go through the form and function but they have no mindset change. Their decisions are different. They're just doing form and function. They're, going through events. They're doing all the checklists of things. It becomes a checklist in Agile and not a true change in mindset. That's the 2 cents version of Quincy Jordan on that.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so we've kind of talked about, some of the impact of COVID-19 and 2020 and so forth. And let's kind of added this slide in here because, one of the things, and I've done this, myself as well, that has been talked about is the new norm, well, what's the new norm? And I would say most of my career, I have been a proponent of there isn't a plan B. There's just a new plan A. And the more you hold on to that plan B, the more you start building, for example, the cultural debt and so forth. So, are these things new norms that we're dealing with, or are they just new? If they're new, are they just a norm now? Is this just a norm now? I am in a meetup. That's a Mississauga meetup. Now, otherwise, probably wouldn't be able to make it, but because we're in a norm now that is different than 8 months ago, there's some things that we're able to do now that we just couldn't do before. And this will become how things are done. The longer this COVID-19 thing plays out, the more this will become normal, the more this is what we just do, the more that we're able to bridge gaps and network with people that we weren't able to network before, except for, a few times a year at conferences and, and so forth, in a very interactive way or, collaborative way like what we're doing today. So, that new norm is becoming just a norm. And if we don't allow that to become the norm, then I think that's where that cultural debt will start hitting us hard, just as far as society and industry, and so forth in general, where we're craving for what used to be and not embracing the benefits of what is now. What do you think about that? I have 12 more minutes, I'll wait. Any thoughts?
I'm that person who can't sit too long in silence, so I'll talk. Yeah, I think I've just said to a friend on FaceTime this morning, there's no way that after all of this we can go back to norm. I don't actually even like the word normal. I studied sociology in university, and there's a lot of talk in university about sociology that there's no such thing as normal. It's a social construct.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't think there ever was a normal before. And I think that I'm like you. I think this, whilst obviously there's lots of tragedy that has come with COVID-19, I think it's maybe something the world needed to think differently and start to do things differently. Wake us up a little bit in terms of how we all do business and interact with each other. And I'm an extremely social person. I like to be with people. So this online world is hard for me, but at least we have the technology and things to help us do that. So yeah, I think business is going to look quite different, and I don't think we should see that as a bad thing. I think it's a good thing for the future, in my own personal opinion.
Completely agree. I think Sanjay had their hand.
Yeah, my contribution is that this is not a new norm. It's a new way of doing things, because we all had remote meetings. We had people like on Fridays you work from home, or one day a week you can choose. So people have been doing things this way. What has changed is now everybody is doing it, and there is it could be a cultural debt or not. I don't know how to frame it. Uh,
Mhm.
the bigger thing is we all love sometime those social settings, and that's what is what makes us more productive at times, doing those small talks, brainstorming ideas. Now if you have to do a meet, even if it is one-on-one, you probably have to give a small notice or say, oh, can I call you? And then the person says, no, I'm doing something else, or being at home. People may not be in that kind of scenario where they're always open. But if you are in office, you're always available. You don't need to be told. Like, if I'm not going to work, going to an office, I might not shave every day. I mean, it's a small thing. So
Yeah.
I'm in my tees. I have always had a formal shirt, or shirt with a collar.
Mhm.
Now I'm in a tee, just because I know it's so different. And that's what I'm trying to say. Even though we all had these remote meetings, we all had those conference calls, and we had all those things, and working with offshore, onshore models, yes, we had different things. But now we have to be more focused, self-focused, problem solving. Um, how to communicate it in more uh, complete way. So now if I have to email somebody about a issue or something I'm dealing, versus what we used to communicate on one, face to face. Hey, this code is not working, or can you look at both the test cases? Like, you instead of framing it, saying it, it takes much longer time. And that's what is going to be more important as a norm, that you change the way you communicate. One has to adopt to new way of accepting that. And I had that experience when I was doing that onshore offshore kind of thing, where major development work was done out of Bangalore, and in Toronto. uh, we knew like it's our morning time, it's the evening time for them, that they are going home, and a lot of people would be in a public transport, so they cannot speak out. So we further delayed the meeting so that most people reach home. One of my QA lead, she had a 4-year-old child, and she said, either I don't want to do meeting, and if I do, there are going to be disturbances. And I said, no, your inputs are always valuable. So why not you bring your child? We all say hello, and then so he also understands that mom is doing something important. Now that is to be understood and accepted across.
I think
That
that brings up an excellent point.
then it was an exception. Now it should be accepted as a norm.
And that's part of what I see as well, that um, part of what is being accepted now, that I kind of felt like was just baggage, before, was almost this kind of pretending that we don't have a life outside of work, or almost like we're not human or something. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Sanjay. I've been in plenty of meetings now, and it is a very common thing now, for, kids to, we'll have, our virtual background on, and you'll see a little kid's face pop in and then pop out. And it's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. And it's perfectly fine. And, 8 months ago, that would have been considered borderline unprofessional. And why? It's not a big deal. There was someone else that had, go ahead.
Yeah, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this, there's two shifts. I think there's the set of norms now that we're shifting in terms of how we're all sort of just surviving through this. So I think that's like phase one we're in, but I think this larger phase two is going to, truly reinvent the concept of touch and transparency, because while our work can be virtualized quite a bit, there's a lot of real hands-on work that is going to require an astronomical amount of investment and reimagining to become lower touch, probably never zero touch, but much lower touch. And that's going to have a value chain impact on us and others. And I think the big area it's going to impact is just the volume. So, I mean, I think the cognitive load, is going to be, is so big, and I would argue almost unsustainable. I mean, you could do it through a crisis, but I don't think you can do it for 5 years like this, the way we're all doing it, especially if more and more is being loaded on. So I think there's something there that's going to have to change. And then just one other point on what Sanjay was bringing up. So I was a single dad. My daughters are grown up now. And I work at Cognizant for 15 years. And it was basically this type of setting. So I've been virtual since 2007. But I sort of played this game because I raised my daughters at full custody. And which was, like non-strategic phone calls. I'm taking them while I'm dropping them off and going to the grocery store and going to soccer practice and just kind of like, and then running quickly to the car and putting my data on so I can get on the laptop and do a no video call. It was just this sort of, and everyone knew. I mean, this wasn't a game. They would always ask me about my kids. So, I mean, but it was this artifice you put up of saying, well, I'm like the norm, just like Lauren was bringing up earlier, the normal, whatever that means. And I think there's this and I think it's a good shift that we're moving away from whatever that meant.
Yeah. So
it means you're taking care of a parent, you're taking care of someone else, whatever. That's just going to become more accepted, which I think is just good in general. And as someone who kind of like went through the sausage making process, I think it's good for a new generation that's not going to have to, I don't want to call it pretend, but sort of pretend. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll share this, if I can just share this one last thing before we get this.
Yes, I was just going to say we're running out of time. People are more than welcome to stay, but if you can wrap up so there are people who wants to leave, kind of like have a closure to the webinar.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to share real quick before, in line with what Aaron was saying. So I did a podcast recently on the Agile mindset in Fortnite. And so I sat and I watched my son and some of his friends play Fortnite, and which Fortnite is the most popular game in the world right now. Like if you take all the sports, every game, everything is the most popular game right now in the world. And I'll tell you, they're not going to have a hard time with any of this. I mean, they come together as a team. They're not calling it team working agreements, but they're coming together. They're figuring out what their goal is, what they want to accomplish. Then they go after it. They work together. They protect each other in the game. It's wild. But I don't think they're going to have a hard time with that generation, coming up. So there are a few things I just wanted to mention real quick as far as mitigating cultural debt. Some of this I've already gone over, so I wasn't too concerned about getting to the slide. But provide a clear vision toward the new culture. So whatever that is, you want to make sure that everyone is really clear on what that new culture is that we're driving towards. It doesn't mean that you have to get rid of everything from the old culture. It just means that you literally kind of go through and almost do like a Venn diagram of, what should be in and what should be out, with where we want to head to. And you want to communicate why. Well, what's the reason why behind having this new culture? What's the reason that these old things don't fit into the new culture? So you always want to answer the question why, because many of us, we're kind of wired up that way, that we want to understand why. And then, as I said, recognize the benefits from the things in the old culture and acknowledge the things for the new culture, and then incentivize desired behaviors. So, we talked about that as far as the performance reviews and all of that. those things are ways to incentivize behaviors, and not just as far as financially, because that's not the best motivator, but feeling good about the work that you do, self gratification, self accomplishment, all those types of things are really good. And we've done a lot of AMA along the way. So for anyone that's going to jump, and I'll actually need to go shortly too, but so I'm on LinkedIn, of course, just as many of us are. Definitely feel free, and I'll welcome any connections and that kind of thing. I'm happy to connect with everyone on LinkedIn, and thank you very much for having me in this meetup. Thank you again, Kimmy, for inviting me. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation a great deal.
Thank you so much, Quincy. It's been fun. I was kind of like curious as to where this was going to land, and I had some questions, but surprisingly, at the getting to the end of the session, I think I have all my questions answered.
Awesome.
And I can better understand not just what cultural debt is, but how to equally handle it, right? And so thank you so much for your time. If anyone wants to hang around and have a chat with Quincy, if he's got some time, you're more than welcome.
Yep, I'll stay on for a few minutes.
Thank you.